Thanks a lot for taking the time to sit down. First, just let us know, how are things going so far?
Well, we're really excited. This campaign is only about 24 hours old, but I've been really encouraged by all the support that we've gotten from people across Iowa. And I'm running because Iowans are working hard but aren't getting ahead, and I want to do something to help solve the problems that hardworking families are facing. And there's a lot of people who are excited to be a part of the campaign.
So, why this race in particular? I mean, did you think about running for other offices, running for Congress, or running for governor?
Well, after the election in November this last year, I had folks start encouraging me to think about running for this seat in particular because they thought that I would present a good matchup against Joni. And my wife and I have talked, we talked for several months about what would make the most sense for us in 2026. She was going through a career transition. We have a 14-month-old who I dropped off at daycare this morning. I had a job that I really enjoyed, but we were gearing up for our first legislative session in Des Moines with the little guy. And so just trying to figure out all the logistics around that and how that would work. And so, for the first few months, it wasn't something that we were leaning toward, frankly. But as I started to get into March and April, we started seeing all the chaos in Washington, D.C. really start to boil over. And the fights around the Republican budget bill that is now working its way through Congress starting to emerge. And we decided that we this was the place where we thought we could make the most impact. And frankly, we'd just rather be in the fight than on the sidelines. And so we started putting some of the wheels in motion in April, trying to think through what would a campaign look like, and is this something that we felt like we could do. Thankfully, we've got a lot of great support from our families, from our neighbors, our community here, and we felt like we were in a position to launch the campaign and give Iowans a different choice about who's representing them in Washington.
One of the biggest divides I've seen this year among Democrats is how to approach the Trump administration. I mean, what did you think about that budget? Not the budget reconciliation bill that's working its way through now, but the funding, the government funding continuing resolution that Congress approved in March that most of the House Democrats voted against and most of the senators, but a small group of senators voted for it to prevent a government shutdown. And where do you come down on that debate? Was that a smart move to avoid a shutdown, or was it a mistake to hand that win to the Trump administration?
I think it was a huge mistake, Laura, and I,
Mhm.
I would have been a no on the bill. And I think it's a part of the broader frustration that so many people have with Democratic leadership in Washington, and obviously with the broader dysfunction in DC generally. um, that the leadership handled those negotiations so poorly. I think if I had been in Washington, what I would have been looking for were what are the clear lines that I want to see in this bill, and focus on those things, right? I think it's absolutely shocking that now that they're looking at this budget bill, it's going to add trillions of dollars to the national debt and deficit, while also making cuts to programs that hundreds of thousands of Iowans depend on. I would have been looking specifically to see how's this going to affect the meals that our kids are able to get, whether it's at school or families are being delivered meals on wheels, those kinds of things, the practical, tangible impacts of that legislation on Iowa families. That's where you really need to start. I know that a few weeks ago, Senator Ernst held that town hall in Parkersburg and obviously made the comment about how we're all going to die from the Medicaid cuts. But there was another part of that town hall that's gotten a little bit less attention, and we can send you the clip if you haven't seen it. But someone basically asked Senator Ernst, well, what are you going to do about it? And she says, well, we'll see what the Senate comes up with, and then I'll make up my mind on how I'm going to vote.
Mhm.
And that is the exact opposite of leadership. I mean, that's not leadership at all, right?
Mhm.
Senator Ernst, I mean, she is close with Republican leadership in the Senate. She and Leader Thune are very close. She should be in there fighting for Iowa, fighting for the things that are important for our state, fighting for rural health care access, fighting for good funding for our kids to make sure that they're not going hungry in the classroom. She should be she should be in there actually trying to lead for Iowa instead of just sitting back and waiting to see what's going to happen with the negotiation. And I think that's a perfect illustration of the contrast that we're bringing to this race. Um, One of the things that I have always prided, myself on, or my willingness to do, is stand up to my own party leaders when I don't think that they're fighting for what's right for Iowa. And I've been willing to work across the aisle with Republicans when there are areas where we can work together and stand up to them when I disagree. I'm always thinking first and foremost about how is it going to affect my constituents and what can I do to deliver for them. And that's the opposite of what we're seeing from Senator Ernst right now.
I want to ask you about some of your work in the legislature, but I need to ask about this eminent domain bill veto
Sure.
yesterday. And what are
Yeah.
your thoughts about that?
I mean, I guess I wasn't surprised. I thought it was possible that she might do a pocket veto, rather than issue a statement the way that she did. Um, Look, that was obviously an issue that had been before the legislature for many years. I saw some of the Republican comments that came out after the governor vetoed it from Representative Kaufman and others. I would be surprised if there are going to be the votes there for a special session to override the veto. I would support that, but I don't think that you're going. I mean, that bill passed the Senate 27-22, so I don't think that you're going to find the votes. You need two-thirds of the chamber
Mhm.
to bring it back for a special session. So I don't see that happening this year. And look, as I said on the floor when we were debating this, my issue isn't with the carbon pipeline as such. My issue is with using eminent domain to erode private property rights for a private project, right? I understand that eminent domain has an important role for projects that are for the public interest, for the common good. But Laura Belin and Zach Wahls aren't getting, you know, dividend checks from some carbon solutions for this pipeline. My guess is that there will be some legislation that is going to touch on this project or things related to it next year. But it's not totally clear. It's not clear to me at all what that legislation will look like at this time.
Can you talk a little bit about your work on the manufactured housing mobile home issue over the years? I think that's something a lot of my readers might not be familiar with.
Sure. So when I was just a freshman lawmaker in 2019, I was elected for the first time in 2018. In March and April of that year, a firm from Utah called Haven Park Capital came into the state and acquired manufactured housing communities and trailer parks across Iowa, including several in my own district. So at that time, I represented Johnson County, Cedar County, and Muscatine County. And they purchased these communities and then immediately raised the lot rent in these communities in amounts ranging from 50% to almost 70% from one month to the next, right? It wasn't like, hey, this is going to happen in a year. You can start budgeting and preparing for it now. It was like, this is happening in 2 months. And that was shocking to so many people, including me, that was, first of all, legal. And second of all, when that happened and I started hearing from my constituents, I learned more about how they didn't really have the same rights that so many people who live in apartments have. In some respects, it really was the worst of both worlds from a legal perspective because they owned the depreciating asset in most cases, which is the trailer or the manufactured home, but they rent the asset that is appreciating in value, which is the land. And so it was my first year, but thankfully I had some good mentors in the legislature, and I was able to quickly get a bill through the Iowa Senate that would have been, if it had passed the House and been signed by the governor, one of the largest increases in residents' rights since that code chapter was first written back, I believe, in the 70s. Unfortunately, that bill was killed in the Iowa House by now U.S. Representative Ashley Hinson, and that's kind of a longer separate chapter of the story.
Hmm.
But that didn't stop me. We gavelled out that year, and I spent the summer and fall working with a bipartisan group of senators who cared about this issue because they saw that it was wrong for Iowans who lived in these communities to be taken advantage of the way that they were. So we actually wound up introducing a bill in the session of 2020 that had 30 co-sponsors. We had 15 Democrats and 15 Republicans who came together to say, this is a Bill of Rights for Iowans who live in manufactured homes. And we think that this is a common sense way of providing these folks with some of the same protections that Iowans who rent apartments enjoy, and just trying to get those parts of the code a little bit more aligned. That bill got introduced with 30 co-sponsors, which your readers will know is a majority, a strong majority in the Iowa Senate. But while we had been working on a solution to this problem, the special interests had made very large campaign contributions. This is all a matter of public record to Republican leadership, and so then President Senator Senator Jake Chapman assigned that bill to his buddy Robbie Smith, and Robbie Smith then put it into a kill committee, and that bill never saw the light of day.
Mhm.
It did get a subcommittee in the House, and I was there for that subcommittee. It was one of the more contentious subcommittees I've been a participant in. But then COVID hit in February, March of that year. And unfortunately, that bill died before we were able to get it in front of the rest of the House. So it was an early lesson for me in the influence of money in our politics and how, unfortunately, when Iowans are talking about how they're being squeezed by higher prices or higher lot rents in this case, a lot of times that is a direct result of the political corruption that we see in our system, where you have a political system that allows for the influence of these very large checks to get cut and to influence decisions. And unfortunately, um, it's all too common in our political system.
Let's talk a little bit about your work on LGBTQ equality. You referenced, of course, that video, which I remember watching at the time in 2011. The first video, you've also worked for Scouts for Equality. And then since being elected to the Senate, you've always been one of the most outspoken legislators against these Republican attacks on LGBTQ Iowans, which I have greatly appreciated. But how do you respond? I mean, we already saw a Republican comment yesterday that you're, focused on DEI, or, that their talking points that they use about girls' sports and other issues. How do you respond to the fact that your outspokenness on this whole constellation of issues is just something that Republicans are going to use against you?
Well, look, I mean, I'd say since the New Deal, basically, the Democratic Party has really stood for two core things. Maybe actually, you should probably say three core things: workers' rights, civil rights, and women's rights. And when you look at kind of our party, when we've had success over the years, I think it is when we are most closely focused on those three core areas that we've had the most success as a party. And when Iowans and Americans broadly trust that we are being true to our core values. I grew up in a household with two moms. It's something I've talked about and written about quite a bit. I also grew up in a union household. My mom, Jackie, is a AFGE employee at the VA hospital outpatient clinic in Coralville. Before that, was an SEIU member. And so I learned at a very early age about the importance of solidarity and sticking together in the face of attacks. And then, finally, obviously, growing up with two moms, women's rights are something that I've always cared about. It's just a core kind of value. It's this, I guess, radical idea that, women are people. And so, from my perspective, I think that the party more broadly, we've been having this conversation, right? We need a new direction for the party. And in some respects, I think what it really comes down to is refocusing on those core values for us as a party: workers' rights, civil rights, and women's rights. That's something that has been a core part of our party for almost a century, and we've had the most success when we were the most closely focused on those core things. And so, in this campaign, we are planning to talk about the number one issue that Iowans care about, which of course is the economy. The fact that we're now 48th in personal income, 49th in state GDP, and dead last in terms of overall economy. That's the thing that I'm hearing about the most from people when I'm talking with people across the state. When I'm hearing from them about the campaign. I'll tell you that the willingness to stand up and fight back for your own family is something that I think Iowans want to see in their next senator. That's part of why they sent Joni Ernst to Washington in the first place in 2014. I, I didn't vote for her in 2014, but that ad that she made about how we want to go to Washington and make them squeal. Like she wanted to shake things up. She wanted to challenge the status quo. Like, there's part of me that wanted her to be successful in doing that, even though we had obviously some very serious disagreements. I think 12 years later, it's clear that she has changed. I mean, Joni Ernst didn't change Washington, D.C. It's very clear to me that Washington, D.C. changed Joni Ernst. I don't know if there's a better illustration of that than her promise to only serve two terms, and now she's obviously gearing up to run for her third term. And that's one of those things to me that just illustrates that she's lost touch with the people who elected her in the first place. She's become disconnected from the values that she stood for when she was first elected. And I think for me, look, not everyone's going to agree with me on every issue, and that's okay. As long as people understand that I am committed to fighting for your family the same way that I fought for mine, I'm sure that we can figure out whatever other disagreements we might have along the way.
On term limits, I've just disclosure, I don't like them. I wish I could still be voting for Tom Harkin. But how do you
Sure.
respond to the people who say This is just by limiting yourself to 2 terms, because you've said that you would only serve 2 terms
Mhm.
if you're elected, that just means you'll never get to chair a committee. I mean, it just means that Iowa will have a less influential representation in the chamber.
Well, look, I mean, it's not written down anywhere that, that's how you have to figure out who chairs committees or what have you, right? I mean, that's a perfect illustration of the problem in Washington, where you have an establishment that tries to funnel all the power into leadership so that they can have control over shaping the debate and I would say limiting the debate to things that benefit them. And that's the problem, Laura, with both parties. And I'll tell you this, when I was first running for the Iowa State Senate in 2018, term limits weren't something that I particularly cared about or felt strongly about. But after being in the legislature for almost 8 years now, one of the things that I've come to believe strongly about term limits is that when you have change in who represents people in Des Moines, and that this is true in Washington, it brings new ideas, it brings new energy, it brings new voices. It brings new people who are connected with the issues, whatever the new issues are that are facing your constituents, your neighbors, your families. And so for me, this is something that I've had my own, frankly, evolution on because I don't think that I appreciated the fact that if you have an incumbent who sits in office for so long, it becomes very hard to imagine challenging them. And in some respects, I think Chuck Grassley is an interesting example of this, right? He ran for re-election in 2022. He's now the oldest member of the U.S. Senate. Chuck Grassley, I think, even though he and I have a bunch of substantive policy disagreements, I don't think there's any doubt that he's still doing the work. He does the 99 county tours, those kinds of things, and that's a good contrast to Senator Ernst. Um, but there are so many. I mean, there's clearly lots of Republicans in the state who would like to run for that seat, but because he hasn't stepped down or been forced to retire from term limits, they have to kind of wait their turn. And so I think you could make the argument that Senator Grassley probably isn't as in touch with the issues that are facing Iowa families as some of the other folks who might be interested in that seat would be. And that's just an example of how that can play out. So I want to also be really clear. When I had some people say, "Well, Zach, if you have these term limits, it's just going to empower special interests." I completely understand that argument, and I don't think it should be term limits alone. I think we also do need to crack down on the influence of money in our politics. We just talked at length about the manufactured housing issue, and I saw firsthand how influential the special interests can be. And so I totally support doing a lot more to reform the ability of those special interests to influence policy as well. And I think that those should be done in tandem. But I would also say it tends to be the people who have been there the longest who have the coziest relationships with lobbyists and special interests. And if we did a better job of rotating the crops and getting new legislators in there who are more in touch with the people they represent, I think that's good for everybody.
You've also called for banning individual stock trades. And
Hmm.
do you own any individual stocks right now, or have you
I do
divested? You do not.
No, no. I've been an index fund investor for most of my adult life. I've got um, uh, you know, yeah, it's basically all Vanguard index funds. I'm a very boring investor, but I think it's actually a good illustration, right? I think that some people are going to want to try to put me into an ideological box because I'm a Democrat from Johnson County. In my own life, I have some very conservative tendencies, and including how I handle my own money. And so I think that from our perspective, this campaign is really not going to be about left versus right. It's really going to be about outsiders versus insiders. I think, again, the kind of core problem with Joni Ernst is that when she ran in 2014, she ran as someone who was an outsider who was going to shake things up. But 12 years later, I think it's very clear that Joni has forgotten where she came from and lost touch with people. I don't think that somebody who's in touch with people would make a comment about how we're all going to die from the Medicaid cuts, because obviously we are all going to die, but it's not supposed to be our senator who's the one killing us.
What's your pitch to people? Look, you're the third Democrat to declare. It looks like Jackie Norris is probably going to run, possibly. Josh Turek hasn't ruled it out. What's your pitch to someone who says, I really like all of these candidates, and why should they vote for you instead of any of the other Democrats running?
Sure. I mean, look, I think I'm going to be the only candidate in this race who has a track record of standing up to our party leadership and establishment when I disagree with them. I've been willing to put my career on the line to do that when I believe it's the right thing to do for my constituents, neighbors, and fellow Iowans. I've got some scars to show for it, as you well know, and that's something that I'll never hesitate to do again when the chips are down and we're fighting for Iowans. I would also say, as part of a new generation of leadership, we're going to try to run a different kind of campaign. When I was taking some time in April to really kind of think through, is this something that my family and I want to do? one of the things that really became clear to me is that if we get to November of next year and I'm the Democratic nominee, and the only thing that we have to show for all of the time and energy and money that has gone into a U.S. Senate campaign is a bunch of TV ads that were on in September and October that I didn't particularly like watching, I'm going to be really disappointed with how things went. I thought really seriously about why I want to do this. What is the campaign going to look like? A lot of the things that I just kept coming back to were the scouting values that I learned as a young man. Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And like the through line in all of that is like service and problem solving. And so I've been talking with the team here as we kind of get the campaign off the ground. How can we really build community service into the campaign? How can we use some of the energy that we're going to hopefully be able to harness in this campaign to help serve Iowa communities and make them better along the way? Because I don't want to just tell people and make empty campaign promises about how I'm going to lead as a U.S. Senator. I want to show people how I want to lead as a U.S. Senator. And so service is a big piece of that. And then another one is problem solving. We're going to do a 99 county tour. We're already starting to hear from Iowans across the state. I want to hear about the challenges that they're facing in their own lives. What are the problems that are affecting them, their families, their communities? And what can we do before I take office to help start addressing those problems today? We're not going to be able to solve every problem, right? I'm very clear-eyed about that. But we have so many people from across the state who want to help, want to be a part of something that is bigger than themselves, that I think that we are going to have the opportunity to start making an impact along the way. And I've told the team this is a huge, huge priority for me. And so we really want to kind of channel that ethos from President Kennedy, right? This campaign is not about what can Iowa do for this campaign. It's what can this campaign do for Iowa.
Are you going to be doing this full time, or are you still working with the next 50, or what's
I
happening there?
We're all in, Laura.
Mhm.
I left my day job about 8 weeks ago, six
Okay.
weeks ago, to start getting ready for the launch here. Look, running a statewide 99 county campaign is hard work. When I was the Senate Democratic leader, I was employed full time with my day job at Green State Credit Union. I was really burning the candle on both ends, and frankly, the prospect of that with a 14-month-old makes me get a little antsy here just thinking about what that would have been like. And so I think, obviously I'll continue to stay focused on my duties as a state lawmaker as well. But we're all in on the campaign. And, it was funny yesterday. We're kind of wrapping up wrapping up our first day on the trail. And then Chloe says, "Oh shoot, it's garbage night." And I was like, "Oh yeah, it is garbage night. I gotta run upstairs and empty the diaper pail. I gotta get the trash out in the kitchen. Gotta get the bins out to the curb." And obviously, it's not a bad metaphor, I guess, for what we're trying to do with the campaign, but also, a good reminder that, there's still a lot of work to do in your day-to-day life, and even if you're running for the U.S. Senate, you still got to take out the trash.
Can I ask just regarding the money in politics? When you were in the leader of the Senate Democrats, the Iowa Democratic Party got a $250,000 donation from a former executive of the FTX crypto exchange. Were you
Yeah,
involved with that? Or what was the story with that? Because I don't think the party ever returned that money or donated it.
you'd have to ask the party what the status of that is.
Okay.
It is definitely the case that we received that contribution. Like so many people, frankly, across the country, we are the victims of, essentially a fraud. And so
Hmm.
that was obviously something that was very unfortunate.
Okay. Is there anything I didn't ask you that you think would be important for my readers to know, either about you or this campaign or the movement you're building?
If they want to get involved or learn more, definitely check out our website and go to zachwalls.com. I've been on Substack for several years, and I've been sharing a lot of like my legislative updates there. We're planning to keep sharing regular updates from the campaign, and so if folks are looking for a way to follow along, that's a really good place to do it. And then on all my socials, it's just at Zach Walls. Can definitely make sure that we have all those links for you. No problem.
Okay, great. So is it Zach Wahls at Substack.com? Is that the Substack? Or
It
does it
sure
have
is.
a
Yep, that's
Okay.
exactly right. Yeah, and Bill can send you over that link.